Hello Internet! Welcome to my after action report of ASLSK Scenario S18 Breaking Bread. This is one I've played on VASL over a couple of evenings. A few more evenings than I'd like, because the problem with playing on solo on VASL is distractions are easy to come by. But I have persevered and got to the end. This is the initial map setup. The orchard and woods hexes have all been changed to rubble, which is a +3 TM line of sight blocking hex, which costs 3 MF to enter. So you can see those locations around here, 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 in this corner here. So in addition to the buildings, there's an awful lot of cover here and a lot of slow movement. To begin with, the Germans have to set up within 2 hexes of this hex, M1, but they've got to be west of row O, so west of this row. The victory conditions are the Germans will win at game end if they are in control of both of these buildings. The Russians are a bit more lax with their setup. Let's move on and see how they've been set up. Russian setup. So the Russians have to set up within 4 hexes of S5 and only 1 MMC per location, although they can have their support weapons and leaders. So there's an MMG up here with some elite squads to cover the victory conditions. Got a 9-1 back here to provide some help rallying them. In this cluster of buildings here, we've got an LMG, some more squads, and a commissar, which is a SSR in this scenario. So it's a morale level 10, leadership modifier 0, who ELR does not apply to, and all Russians stacked with him have their morale level raised by 1, and if they're doing a DM rally check, they do not add the +4 DRM for being desperation morale. He's going to be really helpful at keeping these guys unbroken. And we also have this artillery piece, 45L, aimed at the victory hexes to lay down some fire and hopefully, should the Germans make it there, keep everyone broken. Onto the German setup. So the German setup is quite sparse. They've got a few they can set up within M1, and they'll have more forces entering along the west edge in turn 1. So along this edge there'll be more forces coming in. So to begin with, we've got a elite force with an LMG there, little first line troops there, and a leader with a DC and first line troops there. So they're going to try and get to the victory buildings here and hold them, and the support coming in along the west edge is going to try and aim to go in from the south and on the south and southern side of the west edge and deal with these Russians here. So with the setup over, let's see how the game played out. German turn 1. So nothing to do in the rally phase except to set up the off-board infantry that are joining. So there's a little bit more coming in the north to shore up that assault on the victory axes, and a large cadre down here ready to do something about the forces here. So attempting to lay smoke, but not being successful at all, so they're just cautiously moving in towards those victory hexes. And the Russians are giving back some of their first fire. And the first blood has already taken out a German squad and a leader. So the advancing fires now trying to tamper down some of that firepower, but with very little success. And a few more positions moving in, so they'll have to be able to provide some good defensive fire in the Russian turn. And hopefully keeping this chap here out of the firing line so he can still rally the troops should he need to. Russian first turn. So there's going to be some prep fire where possible, but with some high roll, so it's quite ineffectual. There's going to be very little movement from the Russians in this first turn. They've got the acquisition on that troop. Unfortunately, they have already malfunctioned one of the LMGs, so they're already fighting at a bit of a disadvantage. Now they are going to try and move some troops into the victory hex to try and keep the Germans out there for as long as possible, but with a straight into a kill with the first troops that try and move out there. And the others are broken straight away, so they're going to be falling straight back into that building where they try to advance from. So as always, crossing a road in ASL is one of the most dangerous things to be undertaken. There's a lot more fire now, defensive fire with very little effect, and with the advancing fire there's very few options. So broken troops fall back into the cover of the building, and the leader has moved in to help try and shore them up in the next rally phase. The only real benefit so far has been the target acquired here, so hopefully next turn the artillery piece will have a little bit more effect. German turn 2. Okay, now we've got last few little pieces lining up on the board ready to come in. And unfortunately the attempt down here by the Russians to repair that gun, their LMG that malfunctioned, just ended up taking it out of play entirely. So far they've definitely had the short end of the stick. So a lot of the Germans are taking prep fire shots to try and keep the Russians down. And with the DM troop here and the buildings blocking the line of sight from these two here, we have got a chance for the Germans to make it here and come face to face with the Russians. Now the Germans have now started to move into those victory hexes, with one now occupied, and the artillery does have target acquired on there, so as planned they will be laying down some fire to keep that shut down where possible. Now for some advancing fire. And all with very little effect. But with all this being stone buildings, the +3 that everyone's getting on basically all of their shots really limits the effect of firepower until you build up a big fire group. Now for the advancing phase. And the Germans have moved there to take on that commissar and that first line infantry with a 2-to-1 firepower, so they've got good chances in this close combat phase that's coming up. And the Germans were successful in getting an ambush and taking out the commissar and that one squad. The loss of the squad isn't so bad, but that commissar with his ability to avoid DM when rallying troops is a real big loss to the Russians. So now, as their forces break, getting them unbroken again is going to be a much bigger challenge than it could have been. Russian turn 2. So A few troops managing to rally. You've still got some broken Russians in there, but there are some troops here that can lay down firepower on the victory hexes up here. Now you're starting to see the troops in the victory hexes breaking, so that now if they move in, there may be some opportunity to force them away. But with all the other troops nearby, we need more than just one broken unit here. We need him broken, we need a block line of sight from these guys, and they've got a chance. And the Russians have moved this leader out of the way so there's less chance of him being broken, and you can come in and rally the troops. Got a final fire here is breaking a lot of this stack. Got some pinned, some broken. And of course, where they are adjacent, they are going to have to cross that road to escape. Yep, they're broken there. They're all broken and pinned there. So the German forces at this point are overwhelming. There will be some Russian reinforcements arriving next turn, but they will be arriving along the eastern edge. So even though they're coming along this eastern edge, they do have a road which leaves them a bit open, but they've got these buildings and rubble to get through before they can put up any semblance of a fight. So unfortunately that squad tried to rout there, and they were destroyed by the interdiction morale check. And this force here, they are just completely surrounded. There was nowhere they could go, so failure to rout everywhere would take them closer to an enemy. So that leaves this initial force that was here for the Russians is now down to a single pinned elite squad from the 4 squads it was with support weapons and the commissar. They are getting absolutely picked apart. German turn 3. And they're doing a lot of prep fire because they do have a foothold in those victory hexes. So now it's just controlling the Russians and keeping them from being an effective fighting force. They can keep hold of those buildings. So the artillery piece has moved to lock onto that leader. But while we keep the broken unit there that they did have acquisition on is broken, and there's plenty of firepower to keep it broken. Every time they break, they can just shoot a single squad at it, and that'll replace the DM counter on them. So into the rout phase, and the only people we're going to have to worry about are these, but they do have options where they can move away without being surrounded, so as long as they make these interdiction morale checks, they'll be okay. And that's it. He's made it onto this stone building here, alongside the crew and the artillery piece. But the Germans are fanning out, and the force they have amassed there is now huge. Russian turn 3. They plan for the forces to just come down the road, and the minute they get anywhere where there might be some line of sight, they'll duck into a building and have some come up here to assist here, and some head down here to assist keeping this artillery alive. A bit more firepower to deal with this massive grouping of Germans which is amassed in that building. So I've got some ineffectual prep fire, but they're getting lots of rate. But we finally managed to pin a unit. That was after multiple shots getting rate of fire again and again. So the more prep fire, they've managed to keep this squad DM, but of course now there's the 7-0 leader with it, so they get the chance to self-rally every turn. Well, not self-rally, rally under leader's direction. And be moving these squads in, one counter at a time, to draw fire. Now the defensive fire phase, where there'll be many attempts made on that artillery piece. And the squad that routed there is back under a DM counter, and they will not be able to rally without a leader. Although a crew can self-rally, they can't lead another squad to rally. So going into the advanced fire phase, we've got a pinned unit there. See, this force at the north has generally been quite well survived. And the forces that have come on here, they're not in a position to make any assault from that position. So you do have this worrying stack there, but as we get out of the rout phase and into the advancing phase, they do manage to disperse. German turn 4. So at this point the forces are overwhelming for the Russians, it seems. Prep fire attacks are being launched. Now the Germans are attempting to move in to possibly take control of that artillery piece. The Russians did try and take a shot there, but it didn't work. But at least smoke is being effective for the Germans this time, so they are managing to make this advance a little safer. That said, they have had some of their troops broken as they attempted to make the crossing. But there is a small stack here of a 9-2 leader and a 467 who can take on this gun, which currently has a broken crew. And the crew of this gun does manage to rout away into this stone building next door. And with the advancing phase, the Germans have managed to get onto the hex with the artillery piece. So next rally phase they'll be able to take control of that and possibly do some real damage. Russian turn 4. So they've managed to rally their troops. The Germans have now got this artillery piece. The crew is still broken here. So they're going to have to do something about these Germans really quickly to get that gun back. And they've managed to, so far, pin the squad there. And they have managed to break one of the squads up here. So very minimal effect from the prep fire phase. So there's a large stack now forming next to the artillery piece to hopefully do something about that leader, but to see what effect defensive fire can have. So Russian squad's gone CX to try and get into the building for some support. First fire's being laid down, so there's been a lot of defensive fire from the Germans. They've still got a pin squad here. There are some troops here for the Russians, and there's another little broken conscript squad there. So very little effect from their fire. Again, with all the stone buildings, everything's getting a +3 on the rolls, so as the stacks are now starting to build up, we might see a bit more damage coming in, especially with the big fire group that has been formed around here. They do have a broken squad in the end here with an LMG, but with their one self-ready turn, they might be able to bring him back. So with the route phase, minimal times, and a little bit of advancing, we're going to see the conscript squad and an elite half squad moving in to try and deal with that leader and the pinned squad who have taken control of this artillery piece. And they just about get through it. With their 3-2 force, they do manage to completely annihilate the Germans that are taken there. Although they do not have an actual gun crew there, they can perform some untrained fire. German turn 5. Again, they're going to be laying down lots of prep fire. The crew came back in the rally phase, so they may be able to make it back to the gun. And the prep fire is being mostly ineffectual. And the returning defensive fire is starting to break the people in the victory squad. So you've got one good order squad in for the first victory hex, and the second victory hex is full of broken units. Under DM, there is a leader there, so they can keep if they can self-ready that leader, they can keep trying, but there'll be firepower coming on them for the rest of the game now. Russian turn 5. So the prep fire begins. So the northernmost squads are laying down as much fire as they can, and the forces at the back are shuffling around a little bit before the defensive fire takes place. So we have the crew has moved back in there, but they're now pinned. There are these concept squads here they're just never coming back into the fight at this point in the game. And the Germans are trying to put as much pressure on as they can. German turn 6. So at this point in the Germans' game, they're seeing this stack completely broken. They've got broken units back here, one good order troops there, one good orders on this victory hex, and we still have this big fire group here, which is going to have to lay down some fire where they can. The Russians have taken back control of the artillery piece, but it hasn't done a great deal this game as it is, so we'll have to see. All the Germans want to do is stop this group from crossing this road and getting here. So it's going to be mass prep fire to begin with. And they try and move their one good order squad back there, and they are DM'd. And at the end of the defensive fire phase, every squad of the Germans that has moved up here has faced this wall of firepower from up here, and all are under DM. And there's nothing left for them to do in the advancing phase. They start to advance to give some backup to those troops at the top. Russian turn 6. Now the prep fire is going to be essential here. They can get these guys broken, avoid suffering from these troops, and this group can move over here, force them to rally away and advance into the victory hexes, if the dice are on the side. And as luck would have it, so far that is the case. Residual fires building up along that road, and you have broken one squad that's moved into it, but the others are tiptoeing their way in. Most of the defensive firepower has now already been dealt out by the Germans. They've only got final fire and there's no one adjacent. So the advancing fire from these two squads, or these two stacks, is going to focus here, and that will successfully DM them. As they're already broken, getting a DM count on them is very easy. And that will force them to rout away. And there was a case of interdiction there, but the crew did get away. And in the final advancing phase, the Russians managed to move in. So with that, it has made it a Russian victory in the very last phase of the game. So it's looking very poor for the Russians there. When it comes down to it in this game, the Germans, I think, had a very sound strategy, trying to get the troops to the victory hex early, trying to build up forces here for protection, and also working on the troops that had started here. This assault in particular worked really well. Got rid of that commissar early, which had been trouble. They built the fire group around the corner of that building, which could lay down a lot of firepower. Everything worked really well for them. The Russians had a lot of bad luck, but in the final stages the luck changed and it was the dice that let the Germans down. If they'd have had this firepower breaking the units that had got in there, they wouldn't have made it. With the Russians, they could have done things slightly differently. I think the reinforcements that came on from the east were relatively useless. The only thing of any value it did was get an extra leader up here out of the 5-6 counters that we put on the board. The extra leader up there did help in rallies, but overall it didn't make a lot of difference having them come in. I think if they've not started with the commissar there and had the commissar up in here or back here with maybe some more troops there to fire across the road, it could have been a much more lethal battle for the Germans. But yeah, as is the case with ASL, you can have the best plan in the world. If the dice don't go your way, things can change very quickly. And in this case, it changed for the Russians very nicely. I've been having fun playing with VASL, but I think from now on most of my solo plays are probably going to be on actual cardboard. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the problem with VASL is it ends up taking days to play a game, just because I can't fight the distractions. I have an email pop up, I remember there's something I had to order on Amazon for the kids. There's suddenly, oh look, someone's pinged me on the Discord, better go talk over there. Before you know it, I've completely forgotten about the game. I'm doing the 7 other things I was doing on my computer at the time. Whereas if I put my screens away, lay up my boards on the table with a camera to look at them and just play with pushing cardboard around with no other screens, games go a lot quicker for me. That said, VASL is excellent. It's given so many people a chance to play, especially during these times of the internet, that I'm even due a 2-player game across VASL tomorrow evening. So it'll be my first time playing ASL against another human, so we'll see how that turns out. See what rules I've got completely wrong. I'm quite looking forward to it. But for solo, back to pushing counters around cardboard maps for me, I think. That about wraps up this after action report. As always, I'd like to talk to you guys, so if you have any suggestions of what you do differently or mistakes you think I've made here, drop in the comments. Always love to chat to you guys. So until next time, happy gaming!